Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar. Today we're going to be discussing the rise of extended stay and apart hotels. And in common with the rest of this series, we are looking ahead to the Urban Living Festival, which is a new event which we are launching in July this year at Tobacco Dock in London. We're very excited about this, not least because the date is now looking really good after recent announcements. And this event is focusing on the convergence of real estate and hospitality asset classes. It's going to be a great event and we hope to see loads of you there. More details about the event can be found in the chat. Now, a little bit of housekeeping about today's session. If you are not one of our speakers, if you could keep yourself muted and your camera off. We're going to have about a 45-minute panel discussion, and then we'll have 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, please submit them using the chat or the Q&A in the Zoom function. Excuse me. A recording of the session will be emailed to everybody who has registered in a day or two. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief here at International Hospitality Media. And we are an events organizer and a publisher of B2B websites for the hospitality industry. Before we meet our panelists, I just wanted to give a few bullet points of context to give the conversation some background. Here in the UK, apart hotels and service departments have largely stayed open through the pandemic, while most hotels have had to close. And they've been accommodating health and other key workers. In the US, extended stay properties accounted for nearly 30% of all new hotel projects in the last year. They also accounted for 24% of the projects under construction during Q4 last year. The Highland Group reports that over the last 20 years, extended stay hotel average occupancy has ranged from 10 to 15 points above the overall industry. In Q3 last year, that premium reached nearly 18 points. Nearly half of those polled for the 2020 Deloitte European Hotel Industry Survey said service departments are the most attractive asset class for investment, compared with 20% the previous year. In terms of investment, recently we've seen the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, Ireland Sovereign Fund, take a stake in Stay City as part of its refinancing package. APG and Aware Super will fund the growth of Amsterdam-based apart hotel operator CityID. We'll hear more of that shortly. Room 2 has completed the sale and leaseback of its flagship Southampton property to a fund managed by Aberdeen Standard Investments, and again we'll hear more of that. In terms of guest demographic, the GBTA says 79% of its members and stakeholders would be very comfortable or comfortable travelling for business after receiving a COVID vaccination. And as well as the traditional business travel demographic, the apart hotel model is attracting leisure demand to complement the traditional business customers. Brands such as Lock, Wild and Native have a strong lifestyle element, while Beach Retreats is looking to operate resort apart hotels solely for leisure guests. And again, we'll hear more about that shortly. So this webinar series is sponsored by Res Harmonics, and we're just going to find out a bit more about them in this video.
Res Harmonics is 100% dedicated to service departments and co-living, bringing together all the tools you need to drive performance and deliver a great guest experience. From channel management and direct bookings to finance, housekeeping, maintenance and customer journey automation, whether centrally or on the move, the platform consolidates all information into one system, saving you time, improving communication, and maximising business performance.
If you'd like to hear more about Res Harmonics, then their contact details are in the chat. Now, we've got a fantastic group of panelists here to talk about extended stay and apart hotels. And I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves one by one, and I'm going to go from left to right as I see them on the slide here. So Kristian, welcome. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm part of the APG Real Estate European team. More particularly, I'm part of the private team that is investing across various sectors in different structures in the European market. I spent the majority of my time on various hospitality ventures, and more specifically in the last couple of years, I've been involved in setting up our first investments that are purely focusing on the apart hotel, on the extended stay sector in Europe.
Great, thanks, Kristian. Marie, would you like to go next? Marie, are you there?
Apologies, I've unmuted myself.
No problem.
Hi, I'm Marie. I'm a director in the commercial research department at Savills. I head up our hospitality division, and I should flag I've had a special interest in sort of the emerging sectors within hospitality, service departments being one. So I started covering the sector back in 2005. So it's nice to see nearly 15 years later it's actually gaining some traction. So moral of the story, hold tight.
Thanks, Marie. Robert, welcome.
Thank you very much, George. I'm Robert Godwin. I'm the managing director of Lamington Group and Room 2 Hotels. It's a family-owned, family-run business, which is about 50 plus years old. The business has basically got a foundation of residential investment and service apartments, but our main strategy and focus going forwards really has been for the last few years, and it definitely is for the foreseeable future, is around the apart hotel space and developing our Room 2 products and a new budget Room 2 product, which we developed and launched last year. We've got a pipeline of about 800 keys, including stock open and then signed coming, and probably another 600 late legals. We're on a very sort of aggressive rollout right now. We're fortunate to have had this sale and leaseback of our property in Southampton as a bit of evidence for our sort of market growth. But yeah, so it's a pleasure to be on this panel.
Thanks, Robert. Morgan, over to you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So my name is Morgan Sickles. I am the Vice President of Finance, Planning and Analysis at stayAPT Suites. stayAPT is a new mid-scale apartment-style hotel company that is disrupting further disrupting the boundary between hospitality and multifamily by introducing an all-suite brand that has separate living and sleeping areas in a shotgun layout with windows on both sides. I won't get too much into the product, but we're really excited about bringing a true apartment hotel, all apartment hotel brand to the United States. And we have 3 properties. We just opened our 3rd property last week. And we're excited to open, over a dozen more over the course of this year and many more after that. So I'm excited to be here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Morgan. And finally, over to you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, George. Ben Harper, Managing Director at, we have 3 businesses. We have Watergate Bay Hotel, Another Place Hotels, and Beach Retreats, which is probably the most relevant for this panel. Beach Retreats is a relatively traditional self-catering or vacation rental agency business based in the southwest of the UK. But I suppose, again, of more interest to this panel and this audience, we've recently set up an operating arm, and our vision is to create service department communities for the leisure market on beaches across the UK. And some of you may know me because I used to work for Seiko, now Eden. So some of this vision is taking stuff that we learned there around blending lifestyle hotels with traditional service departments and creating this sweet spot in the middle of lifestyle apart hotels, which I've always thought has a real resonance in the leisure market. So that's what we're about to do. And we've done our first deal for a management agreement for an apart hotel very near St Ives in Cornwall, which is our first of, we hope, many.
Great, thanks, Ben. You can find the contact details for all our panelists in the chat there if you'd like to contact them via LinkedIn and take the conversation on after this session. I'd encourage you to do so. Okay, so let's begin by talking about how the sector has performed through the pandemic. Robert, your Room 2 properties, across the 2 of them, you've traded at 70% occupancy during 2020, which seems remarkable. How have you managed to do that, and who's been staying with you
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I think it's in the high 70s actually. I mean, we've been, looking back on the data, we were shocked ourselves, to be honest. I mean, it's been an incredibly tough climate for the whole sector. And it's been really, really rough. But we've been very fortunate to be placed within the sector where ultimately you can attract groups of people who want to stay for an extended period of time. So you don't require as many people to stay for many people to stay for that long period of time as you do for short stays. So that's where basically back in March 2020 we saw the challenges faced over the Far East, and we really had to sort of wake up as quick as possible and pivot the business model to go after business, basically trying to be as sticky as possible on the books. We were fortunate that, I mean, when COVID struck, we noticed that there was a drop off in demand, wasn't as quick as some of the hotel competitors, but it did exit, and then we had to go and pivot to finding new markets, which would stay for a longer period of time. So, we started to attract sort of March, April groups of business which ultimately we wouldn't have normally taken based on price, but because of the flexibility and the sort of adaptability of the model, it's quite a lean operation. We could cut back on service, cut back on F&B, cut back on operations essentially, and deliver or basically provide accommodation at what budget hotels would normally provide it for. That was really being a very defensive move. So it was group business, group corporate business, and also we looked at some sort of residential, sort of longer stay groups or individuals as well, just to effectively keep the the business or the income coming in. So it was, multifaceted, different angles, trying to tap into people who had that requirement to stay for an extended period of time. And there's lots of people out there for different reasons, and the market shifted. Obviously, there's been different groups of central key workers and different groups. But yeah, that's how we sort of managed to build it back up. And since then, we've been sort of fine tuning it. In Southampton, there's much more of a leisure focus, and has been during the summer that came back, but the winter we've sort of just trying to hold out. And in London, we've found very limited leisure business, and we've relied mostly on corporate, which has been quite strong. But again, relatively low rate, but the service comes back and it's about protecting its margins during this downturn. So we've been had a sort of a relatively good time, but it's about this sort of ability to flex the model, which has allowed us to be, to ride through this situation. Yeah,
thanks, Robert. Marie, would you say Robert's experience is typical of how operators in Europe have adapted and pivoted over the last year? I suspect his occupancy rates are probably higher than most, but
I think the pivoting we've seen is probably actually been happening pre-COVID or pre the COVID crisis. I think, historically, the service department sector sort of was traditionally focused at longer length corporates, and I think still form a very important customer base and will continue to form a very important customer base going forward. But I think that pivot into other sectors, for example, leisure, sort of pre-COVID and post-COVID, is going to continue, particularly as Ben was saying, the rise of more lifestyle type brands is very important to that. But I think, what's key about the sector and why I think it's more defensible to a certain extent is the fact it can pivot more easily through, the type of guests it attracts, it appeals to, also how it can service those guests as well. So I think that's what makes it really interesting, particularly from an investor perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. Morgan, you've launched your brand in the middle of this. How has it performed compared with your expectations pre-COVID?
Yeah, sure. It's exceeded them. Just like Robert and Marie mentioned, we've had to do some tinkering with our customer mix, and I wouldn't say it's ideal. What we planned, we've had to fill and backfill and sort of tinker, like I said, in certain areas. But overall, our first corporate managed property that opened in October sprinted out to stabilization in a month. We certainly didn't expect that. We thought the best case was maybe 4 or 5 months, but we're planning on more like 9. So we were extremely pleased with that. We were also even more pleased with the rate. We were expecting that, basically that, you know, the rate would be affected in one way or another just because of perhaps lower demand. But the thing is that the demand that is out there, regardless of the customer, is just pining for this product. They just are dying to have it, not just because of the desire to have more living space and for transitional housing and flexible working, but they also wanted it because of COVID. We have a product that's very friendly to that. We have a digital mobile app with keyless entry for both the property and the rooms, and an open air courtyard. So a number of features that really made us friendly to the pandemic as well. But yes, we've definitely exceeded our expectations and are looking forward to doing that even more this year.
Thanks, Morgan. Let's move on and talk about investment. Kristian, APG and SuperRare have teamed up to invest up to 500 million euros in CityID, which is a relatively small operator in Amsterdam. What was the attraction of this particular business and the sector in general?
Yeah, I think we looked at it in two different ways. I think first, if we take sort of the portfolio management or portfolio assessment perspective, was that we are an investor in traditional hospitality. We are an investor in traditional residential. In traditional hospitality, the average length of stay is somewhere between 1 to 3 nights. Depends a little bit on the product. For traditional residential, the average length of stay starts probably from somewhere 6 months onwards, and that's due to regulations in various jurisdictions. So we realized that we don't really have a product in our portfolio which caters for a length of stay between 3 nights and 6 months. And we looked at the apart hotel, the service apartment space, and we said, okay, that's exactly the kind of product that is ideal for people who need a longer stay than a traditional hotel can cater for, but for which the traditional residential product is too long. So that was sort of the first step that we took in our analysis, and the second was really it was about the flexibility of the product. So it's really suitable for someone who's on a short-term assignment of a week in another country. It's suitable for leisure travelers who want to spend a week or two in a different city. You can use a product even for students who want to stay in an accommodation which is not traditional student housing, medical guests, really anyone who's between houses, you name it. So it's really the combination of the sort of the portfolio management, looking at what kind of products are out there to cater for the various demands that people have, and also really the flexibility of the product. And yeah, I think the last 12 months have really shown that the product is extremely flexible, and ideally we would have had a different type of market environment to make that business case. But I think the last 12 months have really shown that it's a business model that really works.
Mm-hmm. Do you think because this is a relatively new space that institutional investors are more willing to look at companies, smaller operators, people with less of a proven track record than they would be in traditional hotel investment, for example?
I think it will start to come. I think there's probably still a lot of investors out there who need maybe a little bit more time to be convinced. But I think by now there's already a sufficient a number of companies that have a very attractive track record that can demonstrate that, hey, this actually works. This can deliver really attractive returns to investors. So I hope there will be more investors looking into this space, because we really think that the more competition we have for the portfolio companies that we have, the better, because that increases the awareness of this product type. And I think that's something that really everyone benefits from.
Mm-hmm. Robert, how did your deal with Aberdeen come about? Do you think that was partly as a result of the fact that the wider Lamington Group has a long track history, or do you think that investors are willing to look at new brands in the apart hotel space?
Yeah, so I mean, we set embarked on doing a sale-leaseback, really just to fuel the growth of our brand and to try and then basically get a price in the market to value our covenant. I think we signed her terms sort of in March the 10th or something, 2020, and it was literally just before everything kicked off. And that deal basically got put on hold, obviously through COVID, and picked it back up in September. And it was down to the performance that we had during COVID. It was a relative performance against other hotels that really proved, resilience. I think from an investor point of view, that was one of the most important things. They could see that we could pivot, we could keep income coming in, ultimately during one of the most extreme economic environments that anyone's facing. So, Aberdeen took they took a long-term view. It's a 30-year lease. They basically, viewed that what we're going through now is clearly a blip across that horizon. And if we can sustain, effectively remain profitable, and we did every month all the way through COVID and remain to today, then that's a good sign for things to come. Aberdeen, honoured and then stuck to the same terms which we had agreed pre-COVID, which was also something we were delighted with a sub 5% yield. And to get a transaction in this market at all, I mean, we were extremely delighted. And I think it's a badge of honour which we're very proud to have done completed during these times, and it's for a first transaction. But I think it's also very representative of the state of and the sort of the confidence in the subsector, which is why we're talking about today. And I think Marie has seen it for years, and I think everyone around this table and a lot of operators around the table and across the sector, actually, like Kristian's saying, actually deep down we know that there is a lot of strength about this, and the flexibility and the ability to basically be a much more sort of defensive and lower risk hospitality product. And I think it should attract more. It will, without doubt, try to attract more investment into the space. So, it's a great signal for our sector, and I think it will spur more interest going forwards.
Mm. Marie, do you think, as Robert says, that these two deals are indicative of a change in attitudes of institutional investors to the sector? Is there more interest?
I think there's definitely interest there. I'm just, from my own experience prior to COVID, I was having very regular conversations with a number of institutional investors from a research perspective, because they were all looking at the sector, particularly in terms of diversification within hospitality, and also the fact that, for example, the retail sector, some institutions were looking to sort of reduce their exposure to that and looking at hospitality, because the longer term drivers are strong, and they will continue to be strong once we get over this current situation with COVID. I sort of agree with Robert. I think no one wants to be the first, but now that we're starting to see a few more transactions, there is definitely the appetite there. I think the biggest challenge is probably finding the stock, hence why we're seeing some institutions looking to invest in operating platforms to help, drive that expansion and develop that stock essentially. So probably in sort of 5 to 10 years time, transactions of real estate will form a larger share of total hospitality real estate transactions.
Yeah. Ben, how have you found conversations with investors about a new product which is entirely leisure guest driven?
Well, we're just on the start of that journey, George, and I suppose I'd almost flip that question back to people like Kristian in the audience to ask what their thinking is around a diversification away from a pure urban corporate position to something that is more leisure driven. And obviously, if you step up and out, the surge in domestic tourism, self-drive markets, twinned with lifestyle, hospitality driven guest experience and service, I think is super attractive. And if you add that sort of brand element and the sense of destination into the mix, then we can create year-round seasonality, year-round occupancies that surprise investors. The first deal that we've done with a developer staggered him by way of the model that we put forward, because we know that we can drive 90% plus occupancy year-round on a beach, which is surprising, and we know that because we've done it through our hotels. and we know it because the demand is there, and that demand is heightened post-COVID because of what I talked about before around domestic self-drive experiences. But we think it will stick, and also, having done the research through our own development process, there isn't a brand out there doing this, so hence we see the opportunity, and we're just starting that message. We're starting to tell that story to the investment community, and very keen to hear thoughts.
You've mentioned a question that I was going to ask you later. So how will you stimulate demand in low season in these locations?
Well, it's interesting because I go back to my corporate days at stayAPT, and I listen to Robert, and it's exactly what we did back then, which is you have a multi-segment approach, and you have to understand that from a revenue management perspective, what's good business in January is not good business in August. And again, we've delivered that through our hotels, where the strength of our brand and the strength of our guest experience is that we can go from empty nesters who are coming down in the autumn, couples looking to walk the coast path, to families through the school holidays, to young couples with preschool children, and it's just about extending that mix and extending your audience. And the interesting segment within that I think will emerge post-COVID is this whole thought of work from anywhere. And you know, we talked about digital nomads years ago, but the idea that we are becoming a much more flexible workforce, and the idea that you can come and take an apartment down on a beach in Cornwall for 30 days, be productive for some of that time and be on holiday for the rest, is super attractive. And I think that's an interesting segment that we will tackle both through our hotels and particularly through our Beach Treats brand.
Thanks, Ben. You're probably in the best position to answer a question that's coming from Macy Marvell, given your background at Seiko and now with the three brands that you have there. He's asking how the yield on serviced apartments and apart hotels compares with that on traditional hotels.
A yield as in room rate, or yield as an investor yield?
He hasn't said, but I'm thinking on investor yield.
Very attractive on the serviced apartment self-catering vacation rental side because of the low operational costs and the high occupancies. Our hotels are quite unique because our strategy is long, and we don't necessarily look at investor yields with our hotels in the very short term. However, the attractive, again, I go back to the deal that we've just done, and the yields that we're delivering just through the management agreement that we've done is staggering because we are driving that occupancy and the rates. When you add lifestyle, when you add hospitality into the mix, along with great design and great guest experience, then the rates that you're achieving through our model are better than the local hotels.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ben. Morgan, can you give us a bit of an insight into who is staying at your properties, and is it what you expected when you launched the brand?
Sure. So yes, it is, and it isn't what we expected. So it is what we expected in the sense that the price point is similar. Like I said, it's getting better, or it is better than what we expected. The length of stay, like I was mentioning earlier about tweaking the customer mix, the length of stay originally and through the holidays for our two open properties was a little bit shorter than we expected. But since then, since New Year's, basically, we've really seen a retrenchment of long-term business. I can tell you our property that opened in October has already got over 55% 30-day occupant forward booking. And right now, with the historically, unbelievable low booking window that we're seeing in the hospitality industry, we consider that a great accomplishment. The average length of stay is not quite, but approaching what we had expected. In terms of the type of business, we're probably seeing a little bit more transient leisure, to the point I was making earlier about backfilling than we wanted, but it's nothing like a lot of other folks are having to do. Very manageable. Like I said, tweaking of the mix. we're optimistic. The other markets that we're going into, you know, every market is different. And a lot of the other markets that we're going into are even more likely to be, you know, that blue, gray collar, a little bit of white collar, you know, workers, you know, transitional housing folks, you know, professional projects, whether it's a week or 9 weeks or whatever. Those are our target customers, you know, with different demand drivers in each market. And we're seeing those military folks in some of our military markets. So it's just a question of really getting that back up to the level that we first expected. And we feel that's just a function of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thanks, Morgan. Marie, we've had a couple of questions coming in regarding the area of overlap between apartment hotels and extended stay and ASTs and residential lets. Do you think we will see more operators trying to cater to both markets, and what are the hurdles involved in that? Is it a planning issue? Is it an operational issue?
I think we will see more of that blurring between sort of co-living, resi, serviced apartments. And again, you know, from an operator and investor perspective, I think it appeals just because it allows you to pivot your model subject to where the demand is coming from. So it places the sector, you know, in a very, you know, good position. But, you know, there are challenges with that, particularly, you know, in the UK from a planning perspective, and also operationally, because you still need to have some flex if you want to tap into the leisure market, some flex in terms of your units in order to do that. And also for those guests that are staying, for the longer length, you know, resi type stays, they may not want to be necessarily staying next door to someone who's on a weekend stay, potentially on a hen do. So there is some operational challenges, but I think it's a really attractive opportunity. It's just who can crack it first and deliver both on the operational side and also from the sort of guest experience side.
Robert, what would be your take on that?
Well, I think it's sort of interesting to look at whether we talk about extended stay hotels or extended stay apartments, because I think there is a difference in terms of where they place themselves and the kind of level of service offering. You know, the brands which sort of pivot sort of closer to the hotel side, well, I think in the future sort of should be, you know, can have a sort of greater emphasis on brand and a greater emphasis on service and experience. And I think that's a huge differentiator, and I think that's where hotels, you know, stand out. I think there's in the extended stay sort of apartment world, the level of experience and the level of service is capped really by the number of sort of communal facilities in some cases. And you know, there are brands that definitely do a mixture in between. But I mean, at both ends of the spectrum, I think you need to be at a certain scale to be able to deliver a huge spread, because there are certain facilities, if you pivot towards the hotel, that you need a certain amount of keys and number of users in the building to be using those facilities as if a hotel. But equally, to have a longer stay group of your business, there's generally less demand for some F&B facilities or things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's a place for it. It depends on, you know, local markets, and it depends on I think sort of where brands want to sit themselves. But yeah. Would
you ever see yourselves in a position where you have C1 and C3 use in the same building, or is that just too much hassle?
No, we're strictly C1, and that's where we place our focus.
Yeah. Okay. Morgan, we've talked about the extended stay market in the US and how well it's performed, and there's a huge amount of product in the pipeline. Do you think the sector can continue to perform as strongly as it has when all this new supply comes on? Do you think there are new audiences coming to the sector all the time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, I think about it in two ways. One, I think about it in terms of all of the new supply coming on, and most of those brands are still the old way of thinking about extended stay, which is, you know, waking up next to a dishwasher. And we just don't think that guests deserve that anymore. They deserve to, you know, sleep in a bedroom and live in a living area. And so as much as that new supply is coming on, and I think that it will have varying degrees of success, and I'm bullish on extended stay, I think the product is moving in our direction. And I'm really, you know, I think we're seeing more of that. I mean, you know, there are other brands that are tapping into that from the upscale all the way down to economy. You know, and we've been dancing around it, but I think what we're seeing is, you know, just like a lot of other industries, the democratization of hospitality and living. And, you know, transportation's had it with Uber, and, you know, we're seeing it now with Robinhood and investing, and, you know, whether it's geographically and bringing apartment hotels to, you know, that Airbnb and others aren't necessarily doing, you know, bringing apartment hotels to under or unserved secondary and tertiary markets, whether it's demographically, you know, bringing access to apartment hotels to customers that don't necessarily, you know, live and work in expensive offices in urban areas, or economically by offering it at a more affordable and valuable price. I think, you know, everyone deserves to be able to buy into this new flexible living. You know, you can live permanently wherever you want, and if you want to work remotely and flexibly, you should have the ability to do that, and that's what we're trying to bring with stayAPT.
Mm-hmm. We spoke earlier about the about investor attitudes in Europe. Are you seeing something similar in the States, that you're getting more interest from owners and investors as a result of how the sector has performed in the last year?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I think I mentioned earlier, just like everywhere, we've had, you know, a pretty severe, severe impact to the capital markets starting spring of last year, and fortunately, we're already seeing strong signs of thawing there. We expect that to be fully underway by the summer, and that's just the debt side of things. The interest from equity investors in the form of franchise partners for us. From a corporate perspective, we're all set. We have a great private equity sponsor, but from a franchise partnership perspective, we have tons of interest. It's literally just the one very significant roadblock has been access to debt capital, and you know, we're, like I said, we're optimistic that hurdle's coming down as we speak.
Thanks, Morgan. Marie, quite a few of the extended stay brands from the big hotel groups have yet to make their way over to Europe, but the ones that have done, such as Residence Inn and Staybridge Suites, have done really well. Why do you think some of the others have been more reticent, and do you think the last year or so could be the catalyst for them to come over?
I think, I mean, some of the, probably in some cases we haven't seen a massive expansion of those platforms into Europe, largely because historically they've favoured expansion through sort of management contracts and franchises, so it can be difficult to compete as a result. But I, you know, do know some of those operators have looked to take and have been willing to take leases for properties in really good locations. So I think we may see more of those operators come over, maybe some nervousness as well, just potentially how well, you know, service departments speaking in terms of the European context is still, you know, relatively new sector, so that might be generating some nervousness around expansion. But there's, you know, a lot of opportunity if you look at sort of the level of demand, just leisure and corporate across Europe, and existing extended stay apart hotel supply. You know, the majority of European markets are still significantly undersupplied, so there's definitely lots of scope for expansion of the sector. I just think, you know, those operators that are driving it are probably going to be the more native European brands and operators.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Kristian, could you give us an idea of your roadmap for CityID and how you intend to grow the brand? Will it be mainly through new builds or conversions? Will you be looking to acquire other platforms?
Yeah, so like Marie said, the amount of existing stock in Europe is quite limited. So I would assume that 80 to 90% of the assets that we will have within CityID will be newly developed. I think we will do some refurbishments as well. That's attractive, obviously, because the lead time is shorter, but then it doesn't necessarily allow you to create the kind of product that you really want. In terms of geographies, we will. The aim is to create sort of a critical mass in the key cities that we identify, and that means that we are looking to establish somewhere between 2 to 4 assets in the key target markets, and by that way, sort of establishing a serious presence in the cities that we think are the most attractive in the European marketplace. But yeah, it will take some time, but we're confident that we will find the right locations, and yeah, eventually we will be developing our own stock.
Thanks, Kristian. A question for the operators here is coming from Nicholas Horvath, who asks, how are your current tech stacks helping or hindering your development on a strategic level? Traditional hospitality tech stack may not be adapted to your specific needs. Robert, do you want to kick off with that one? How is the technology that's out there? Is there enough bespoke technology for how this sector operates now?
Yes, I mean, we look at ourselves closer to a hotel. I think within the hotel world, there's definitely more provision of softwares and you know, software around there basically to plug into. We have put a strong emphasis on our technology and our systems and operations and operational efficiencies and automations in order to basically effectively keep a lean team and make sure that we're as competitive as possible from our cost base. And there's a lot of technology which we have found and we've been tapping into. Some of it's required a little bit of dev, but ultimately for what we need right now, and in terms of like the alternatives, which are the capital costs of actually investing and developing technology, we are comfortable with what is out there. There's areas which we would like to invest into, but you know, it starts with a central PMS and you know, integrate from there really. And you know, APIs are pretty open to use, and we have been doing integrations where you know it does require in development. But basically, it's all been focused around just trying to maintain the leanest operation. And yeah, I think it's out there, and there's lots of things coming. But it is actually central to what we do and how we view things, because it's just the market is so competitive, and you've just got to stay at the forefront of it to keep as lean as possible. So that's my experience.
Thanks, Robert. Ben, do you find that the technology that you use in the hotels is sufficient for the apartments, or do you need another option?
No, we have separate platforms. To Robert's point, the hotel suite of technology is relatively straightforward, and we work on in a resort environment where there are multiple facets of our business, and that's all taken care of. Having just been through a selection process for our technology platform for beach retreats, I think there's an opportunity, and I suppose I'd summarize that by saying I think the relatively archaic, convoluted nature of old school self-catering versus as an agency platform versus a operator platform, those two coming together into a suite of technology is something that's relatively new, particularly in the UK for this space. And again, having just been through a selection process, there aren't many doing it. So we've selected someone who we think we can work in partnership with. So I'm comfortable, but I would think there's an opportunity there.
Thanks, Ben. Let's look at how the sector is going to evolve, and I'd like all of you to suggest one or two exciting new brands in our space other than your own. So I want you to give your peers a bit of credit. So Ben, do you want to start while you're here?
Sure. There are a bunch. There's too many to talk to in the kind of alternative accommodation space. You know, people popping up with tree houses and huts on beaches and doing all sorts of cool stuff. I'd throw Roompot in there. I think what they've done is really cool. I think they've taken a relatively traditional model and layered in lifestyle. And really, I take a lot of inspiration for that, and I take a lot of inspiration for the fact they've had huge success doing it, and they're generating some scale.
Robert, who's caught your eye recently?
Well, I suppose says, I mean, I think I'm particularly attracted and inspired by. I mean, Ben, I think in itself has got a great series of products. I'll be the first to stay at one of your beach huts. Come and name it there. But I think the draw of sort of nature-led tourism or hotels which provide an opportunity to get some more of nature, get out of cities, I think is definitely an area which is going to blossom. And I think it's an area which I'll keep my mind on. I think there's a lot of value to sort of to take from an experience which gives you a bit more wholesome experiences. So I mean, I think there's lots of competitors out there, but that's the sort of the area which inspires me the most. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Kristian. Any new entrants to the market that you've been excited by?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really have any names on my mind, just simply because we went through our sort of selection process some time ago, and now we are working with a number of partners that we've selected. But I do think it's very interesting the product that Ben is establishing, because it's purely leisure driven, and that's really not something that you often see in this space, because it's been traditionally corporate demand led. So I'm very curious to follow the journey and see what kind of experiences you will have in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kristian. And Marie, how about you?
Difficult. It's like naming your favourite child, isn't it?
I can do that. I can do that.
I can do that. I've only got one, so it's easy. I think I'm not going to mention any names, but I agree with Kristian in terms of watching Ben's space, and a very interested, what is life going to be like post-COVID, and how we travel, and how we work, and being a sort of I know it's a terrible term, but the digital nomad. I think there's a real opportunity in that, and having been someone who actually stayed in another place in January, which isn't a key probably month, it's a great product. People will travel, and I think it's not just about the summer months and the holidays. It's actually people are looking to do something different, leisure, work throughout the year. So I think that is a really interesting space, and also that says something for those operators concentrated on urban markets as well, and the ability to tap into that hybrid leisure corporate traveler. But I think any of the brands that are developing a kind of lifestyle product, I think that's a really interesting part of the market, whether you're just corporate focused or leisure focused, or you're looking at that sort of hybrid mix of the two.
Great, thank you. Morgan, do you want to give us a US perspective of maybe some new entrants that we should be looking out for?
Yeah. So first of all, on the upper scale of what we're doing in the apartment hotel area, I look at AKA. The Corman family has put that together and is really publicizing that they're going to put some effort into growing it, especially after the pandemic. So I look to them, more on the urban and like I said, upscale luxury side. But as far as the concept, the thing that excites me the most is a company called The Landing out of Birmingham, Alabama, that's on the multifamily side, not doing the master lease, which, pretty much has gotten wiped out after COVID, but they're doing a membership-based model where, you sign up to this membership club, and it gives you access to flexible lease terms from a month to 12 months 24 months, whatever, at their properties all over the country. I think they really get, and more on the multifamily side, are trying to broaden access to, to flexible living and working, kind of like we're trying to do on the hotel side. So those are my two that I can think of that I'm really looking at.
Thank you, Morgan. Just got time to take a few questions that have come in via the Q&A. The first one is for you, Marie, and it's from John Patrick at Christie & Co. He asks, in view of the significant challenges for valuers considering operational real estate in the current market, how do you see the valuation of apart hotels and service departments changing?
I'm going to have a bit of a cop out in the sense I'm not a valuer, unfortunately, so I'm not qualified, unfortunately, to answer that question, but we do have an excellent valuation team at Savills and I'm sure a number of my colleagues would be willing to answer that. So yeah, happy to flip that question onto them.
Kristian, would you fancy picking that one up?
Yeah, so that's been one of our, let's say, I mean, not investment thesis necessarily, but that's been one of the attractions we have had into this space, is that we've traditionally seen apart hotels in Europe being valued at higher yields than hotels. To us, it's a little bit counterintuitive because you have a longer length of stay in an apart hotel than you have in a hotel. So in our view, the yields for apart hotels should be somewhere between residential and hospitality and not above traditional hospitality. So yeah, I think we would expect that at some point in time the valuations will of apart hotels will yeah, the yields will go down.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Kristian. A question for the operators from Andrew Frampton. Do you feel that in response to COVID, you'll be actively looking to change your bathroom specifications to an increase in contactless or reduced contact product? That sounds like a lot more electronics to me. I don't know. Ben, do you want to start with that one?
Are we redesigning our bathrooms post-COVID? No. Are we redesigning our guest experience? Yes, across all of our businesses. And it's interesting, it's kind of come in different waves. I think when we opened the hotels, particularly in July, my message to the team was we're a hotel, not a hospital. And we had to strike a balance between hospitality and hygiene. And actually, hygiene is at the forefront of what we do anyway. However, we built a guest app. We did stuff that we were going to do anyway in order to drive down the contact involved. And actually, opening up in May now, we will try and bring some, it's vital to bring hospitality back into the forefront of what we do. And we're a people business and we're people, as I said, and our teams and our guests want more contact, albeit we found a really nice sweet spot of the use of technology to drive efficiency, but most importantly, drive guest experience. But to be straightforward, no, we're not redesigning our bathrooms.
Well, and let's broaden it out to contactless technology, full stop. Robert, is that something that you've had to adapt, or was that built into the Room 2 concept from early days?
In all honesty, I think we had it built in pre-COVID that we were going to be driving towards mobile check-ins and sub-check-ins, try and reduce the amount of friction, should we say, during check-in, check-out processes times, just because I think that's what a lot of regular guests are seeking. Some leisure guests who are short stay enjoy that touch point and that service better. For other markets, actually you want to be able to allow people to go straight to room, and so we had already planned it, but like Ben said, I think we've accelerated that and made it much more sort of I suppose a pillar during these current times, and hopefully it will stick because it does add value to the guest. It saves operational time for us, and I think the services provides a sort of a strong a bit of differentiation for other hotels which maybe can't provide that at the moment. But yeah, I think again, to Ben's point, I think beyond COVID, I think this time will pass, and there will be, for particularly the operators that seek to deliver it, there'll be a little bit of a fallback to making sure that we're providing a good service and as much as is required to deliver, so to ensure people come back and enjoy their time. So in part, there's the savings, but in part, I think it will be a sort of reversal as well.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Marie, I'm going to ask the last question of the session to you. As you said earlier, you were one of the first analysts to start looking at this space in 2005. So how would you sum up its evolution since then?
I should say I was age 10 when that happened. How I see the evolution, I think, you know, we are on that road, the evolution road for the sector. You know, pre-COVID, you know, we saw the emergence of lifestyle brands and that ability to tap into different sort of guest segments, corporate, leisure, and also just the beginning of sort of tapping into that sort of resi, co-living space as well. I think that's where I see the sector moving to. It shouldn't be at the expense of the corporate longer length guests, because that is, you know, still will be a very important part of the sector. And I think it's been key to its success and its attractiveness from an investor perspective, just because those guests tend to stay longer, so you have lower voids. So I think I'll just see that trajectory continue, and if anything could accelerate. I think what will be interesting in a post-COVID is whether we'll see new types of guest segments emerge. I think in the case of London, for example, you know, we've seen people move out of London because they don't need to be going into the office 5 days a week, but you know, some of those people will be in the office 2-3 days a week, and they may want to stay in London at that time. So it could be the case they'll see serviced apartments as a slightly more attractive alternative than hotels. So if anything, we could see a heightened awareness of the product, which I think, you know, is a great thing. So yeah, I think we're on that road to a very interesting evolution.
Great stuff. Thanks, Marie. That's a good note to end it on. I'm going to show a couple of slides before we wrap up and thank our panelists. I just want to quickly say before I go through these that entries for the Service Department Awards are now open, and the entry period runs until April the 30th. And we will be having an awards ceremony in London on June the 24th. Now, last year's awards was in March, and I think it was about the last major event lots of us in the industry attended. And it's looking like this year's maybe one of the first large events that we'll be attending this year. So if you want to get involved with that, please go to servicedepartmentawards.com to find out more, and we hope to see loads of you there in June. Next week, we've got quite an intense week of online sessions called the Urban Living Light session, covering lots of different asset classes there. More details can be found at urbanlivingfestival.com, but there's some great stuff there and some really good panelists. I'd urge you to look into those. The Urban Living Festival, as I mentioned at the start, is taking place in London in July. We've got a fantastic cast of sponsors, media partners for that. We're very excited about that event, and if you'd like to find out more about that, then please contact my colleague Katie. More details on the event and Katie's contact in the chat there. Do check us out on your various social platforms and get in touch. We're quite active on social media, and it'd be good to hear from you. And finally, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Marie, to Ben, to Morgan, to Kristian, and to Robert. Thanks to you all for joining. And our sponsors, Res Harmonics, their details are in the chat there if you'd like to get in touch with them. And see you all on another webinar soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Right, thanks, bye.
Thanks, George.